During our holiday meal, my relatives ordered me to hand over my grandparents' legacy to my sister, arguing she was the proper female inheritor. As I declined, my father clutched my arm, then snarled, "You will comply." Just then, a voice from the kitchen's entrance spoke. The hand that clamped around my wrist wasn't just my father's. It was the culmination of 3 decades of unspoken resentment, a desperate, final attempt to control what was never his to begin with. Just moments before, the crystal chandelier above the dining table had cast shimmering shadows across 12 carefully arranged place settings, each holding a piece of my grandmother's finest china. I could feel my breath fog slightly in the frigid air of the house, a subtle cloud that belied the roaring fire crackling in the adjacent room. My parents, for as long as I could remember, had championed low thermostats in winter, claiming it built character. Now I understood. It was less about character and more about a quiet, long-term preparation for a future where my grandparents' wealth wouldn't be readily accessible. "Pass the gravy, please." My voice, a deliberate whisper, cut through the suffocating tension that had been steadily mounting since we'd first taken our seats an hour ago. No one moved. Across the table, I watched my mother's knuckles whiten as her grip tightened on her wine glass, the rich burgundy liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim, a mirror to the agitation simmering beneath her composed facade. Natalie, my sister, offered a smile that reached her mouth but not her eyes, that familiar, practiced expression I'd come to recognize as her manipulation face. My father cleared his throat, a deep, resonant sound, calculated to command attention. He'd always used that particular noise, a low growl of authority, to signal an impending announcement he expected to be met with unquestioning acceptance. I'd heard it before major family decisions, before punishments were meted out, before lectures on responsibility and duty. "We need to discuss your grandmother's estate." He punctuated the statement by setting down his fork with exaggerated care, the silver clanking against the porcelain plate with an almost theatrical flourish. "There's been a considerable misunderstanding that needs correcting." I kept cutting my turkey, my movements steady and deliberate, even as a frantic drumbeat echoed in my chest. 3 months had passed since Grandma Lorraine's funeral, 3 months since the reading of her will, 3 months of increasingly aggressive phone calls and unannounced visits from my parents. They'd started subtly, with gentle suggestions about family obligations and doing what's right. But the pretense of subtlety had eroded with each passing week, leaving behind a stark, uncomfortable demand. "There's no misunderstanding," I replied, my tone carefully neutral, refusing to grant them the emotional reaction they so clearly craved. Grandma and Grandpa made their wishes clear in their estate documents. Everything was legally reviewed and properly executed. Natalie leaned forward, her pearl necklace catching the soft light, glinting like tiny eyes. She was dressed for this dinner as if it were a high-stakes board meeting, all sharp angles and calculated presentation. But you have to admit it's unfair. I'm the one who actually needs the inheritance. Trevor and I have the medical expenses, the mortgage on the new house, Sierra's private school tuition. A hot wave of resentment, years in the making, surged through me. "You chose that house. You chose that school." The words spilled out before I could censor them, a raw, unfiltered truth. "Nobody forced you to buy a 6-bedroom colonial in the most expensive neighborhood in the county." My mother's face flushed, 2 angry spots of color appearing high on her cheekbones. "How dare you speak to your sister that way? She has a family to support, responsibilities you couldn't possibly understand." This was the familiar refrain, a song I'd heard countless variations of my entire life. Natalie, the golden child, had always followed the approved life script: early marriage, immediate children, suburban domesticity. I, on the other hand, had chosen graduate school, a demanding career in research biology, and an apartment downtown that I actually enjoyed coming home to each night. My choices had always been treated as temporary rebellions, phases I'd eventually outgrow when I finally came to my senses and realized what truly mattered. I understand perfectly. I met my mother's glare without flinching, a small triumph of will. I understand that Natalie made financial decisions assuming she'd inherit Grandma and Grandpa's money. I understand that those assumptions were wrong. And I understand that now there are consequences. My father's chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as he stood, his full height meant to intimidate. The technique had worked when I was 7, when I was 12, even when I was 17. I was 31 now, and his physical posturing just looked tired, a faded echo of a power he no longer held over me. Your grandparents didn't understand what they were doing toward the end. His voice carried that familiar edge of authority he'd cultivated through decades of corporate management. They were confused, elderly, easily influenced. That inheritance should rightfully go to the firstborn daughter, as family tradition dictates. I laughed, the sound sharp and humorless, a harsh counterpoint to the festive dinner. Family tradition? Grandpa was a patent attorney who believed in individual merit and explicit documentation. Grandma was a bookkeeper who kept records of every single penny. They were neither confused nor easily influenced, and you know it. The truth, heavy and undeniable, hung between us. My grandparents had been meticulous people, revising their will 3 separate times over the past decade, each version carefully considered and legally sound. The final version, created just 18 months before Grandpa's death, had left the bulk of their estate to me, with specific explanations about why. Trevor, Natalie's husband, finally spoke, his voice carrying that practiced smoothness he used when negotiating business deals. Look, we're not trying to take everything. Just be reasonable here. Split it 50-50 with Natalie. That's fair, right? Sisters sharing equally. I set down my silverware, abandoning any pretense of eating. Fair would have been our parents treating us equally growing up. Years of suppressed anger began to bubble to the surface, a bitter and intoxicating tide. Fair would have been them contributing the same amount to both our educations instead of paying for Natalie's entire private college experience while telling me state school was good enough. Fair would have been them showing up to my accomplishments instead of always having an excuse. My mother's lips pressed into a thin, white line. We had limited resources. Natalie needed more support because she was preparing to raise a family. You were always so independent, so determined to do everything yourself. We thought you didn't need us. This revisionist history was almost impressive in its audacity. I'd learned to be independent because dependence meant disappointment. Every time I'd asked for help as a child, I'd been told to figure it out myself, while Natalie received immediate assistance with even the most minor inconvenience. You thought I didn't need you, or you simply didn't want to bother? The question came out, sharper than I'd intended. I remembered asking Dad to come to my 8th grade science fair, an elaborate project on coastal erosion patterns I'd spent 2 months on. He said he was too busy with work, but somehow, he found time to attend Natalie's cheerleading practice that same week. My father's jaw clenched. That was one instance from decades ago. You're cherry-picking memories to paint us as villains. One instance. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the Notes app where I'd been documenting memories during therapy. My high school graduation, where they left immediately after the ceremony to get to Natalie's doctor's appointment for a routine checkup. My master's degree celebration dinner that they canceled because Natalie was having morning sickness and needed Mom to bring her crackers. My 30th birthday that they forgot entirely because it was the same week as Sierra's piano recital. The list went on, each item a small wound that had accumulated into something much larger. My therapist had suggested writing them down, not to weaponize them, but to validate my own experiences. Now, they served as evidence that the pattern had been consistent, deliberate. Natalie's voice rose, defensive and sharp. So, you're punishing us now, taking Grandma and Grandpa's money because you're petty and vindictive about the past? A cold certainty settled over me. I'm not taking anything. It was given to me. The distinction felt crucial, a powerful truth that cut through their manufactured narrative. Grandma and Grandpa witnessed the same patterns I did. They saw how you all treated me, and they made a conscious choice about how to distribute their assets. My father moved around the table, positioning himself between me and the exit. The tactic was obvious, meant to make me feel trapped and compliant, a subtle psychological manipulation designed to assert dominance. This kind of dynamic, where one party systematically undermines another's self-worth while simultaneously demanding compliance, is a classic example of emotional manipulation. It often relies on gaslighting, making the victim doubt their own perceptions, and leveraging perceived authority to control outcomes, creating an environment where the victim constantly questions their own reality and value. Your grandmother was manipulated in her final years. You spent all that time with her, probably poisoning her mind against your own family. The accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. Grandma was sharper at 87 than most people are at 50. She taught accounting at the community college until she was 79. She balanced her checkbook to the penny every month until the week she died. Nobody manipulated her into anything. Then why? My mother's voice broke on the last word, the emotion genuine this time. Why would she cut out her own granddaughter's children? Sierra and Hudson adored her. How could she leave them with nothing? She didn't leave them with nothing. I watched their faces carefully as I delivered the next blow. She established education trusts for both of them, fully funded through college. I'd reviewed every page of the will multiple times with Walter, the estate attorney. But she put controls on the money, so you and Natalie can't access it for other purposes. The funds go directly to educational institutions, not to you. The revelation landed like a bomb. Natalie's face went from flushed to pale in seconds, the color draining from her cheeks. What? There are trusts? Why didn't anyone tell me? My gaze was unwavering. Because you never asked about the full will. You just assumed you deserved the money and started making demands. I watched understanding, cold and hard, dawn across her features. The trusts are worth about $300,000 combined. Sierra and Hudson will have their entire higher education paid for, plus graduate school if they choose. But you can't use that money to pay your mortgage or buy a new car. Trevor's expression shifted to something calculating. $300,000, then the rest of the estate must be. I cut him off before he could finish the calculation. The specific amounts are confidential, and they're going to stay that way. My father tried a different approach, his voice softening into something approximating warmth, a sudden shift in tactic that felt chillingly familiar. Sweetheart, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye. Maybe we made some mistakes when you were growing up, but we're family. We should be supporting each other, not fighting over money. The manipulation was textbook, the sudden shift to affection after aggression. I'd seen him use the same technique in business negotiations, alternating between intimidation and charm to keep opponents off balance. We could have supported each other. My voice remained steady, refusing to match his false warmth. You could have supported me when I got accepted to Cornell with a partial scholarship, but still needed help with the remaining tuition. You told me it was too expensive and not worth the investment. Then 6 months later, you co-signed a loan for Natalie to buy a brand new car for her 16th birthday. My mother's hands twisted in her lap, a nervous tick. That car was a safety issue. Her old one was unreliable. Her old one was 3 years old with 40,000 miles on it. It was perfectly fine. The anger I'd suppressed for years was bubbling up now, a hot, uncontrollable geyser. Decades of inequity demanding acknowledgement. But Natalie wanted a new car, so she got one. I wanted an Ivy League education, but that was frivolous. Natalie stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, a jarring sound in the tense room. I'm sick of this. Sick of you playing the victim, acting like your life has been so hard. You have a good job, a nice apartment. You're not struggling. Because I worked for everything myself. The words came out hard and final, like breaking glass. Because I took out student loans and worked 2 jobs through college. Because I learned early that I couldn't count on any of you for support, emotional or financial. Trevor put a hand on Natalie's shoulder, attempting to calm her, a futile gesture. Let's all take a breath here. Getting emotional isn't helping anyone. Don't tell me how to feel. I turned on him, suddenly furious at his presence in this family drama. You've been sitting there silent this whole time, letting your wife and her parents try to bully me into signing over my inheritance. You don't get to play peacemaker now. He held up both hands in surrender, backing away. Smart move on his part. My mother tried once more, her voice taking on that pleading quality that had always made me feel guilty as a child. Think about what you're doing. You're tearing this family apart over money. Is that really what you want? To be alone. The threat was implicit but clear. Choose the money or choose the family. As if those were the only options. As if they hadn't already made it clear through decades of behavior that I'd never truly been a priority in this family structure. I'm not tearing anything apart. You did that when you decided my inheritance was more important than your relationship with me. I met each of their gazes in turn, making sure they understood the weight of my words. Grandma and Grandpa's estate was theirs to distribute as they wished. They chose to give the bulk of it to me because I was the one who showed up for them, who cared about them as people rather than as potential sources of money. This dynamic reveals the profound impact of perceived parental favoritism, a social phenomenon where parents, consciously or unconsciously, demonstrate preferential treatment toward one child. The favored child often develops a sense of entitlement, while the unfavored child struggles with feelings of inadequacy and resentment, leading to long-term relational damage and a persistent belief that they must constantly earn love or recognition. My father's face darkened again, the brief attempt at warmth evaporating. They were old and sentimental. They didn't understand the practical realities of modern life, the expenses of raising children, maintaining a household. They understood perfectly well. Grandpa worked as an attorney for 45 years. Grandma managed their finances and investments. They knew exactly what money meant and what it could do. I pulled out the copy of Grandma's letter that I kept in my purse, unfolding the delicate pages. Grandma wrote me this 6 months before she died. She was very clear about her reasoning. My mother reached for the letter, but I pulled it back. You don't get to touch this, but I'll read you the relevant part. I cleared my throat, the words familiar from multiple readings. She wrote, "Your parents have always favored Natalie, though they deny it if confronted. I've watched them diminish your accomplishments while celebrating hers for far too long. Your grandfather, and I want you to know that we see you, we value you, and we're proud of the person you've become despite the lack of support from your parents." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face had gone completely white, her eyes wide and fixed on me. My father's fists clenched at his sides. Natalie looked stricken, possibly finally understanding that this wasn't just about money or sibling rivalry. She also wrote, I continued, my voice stronger now, imbued with the power of validation, I expect your family will pressure you to share this inheritance. They'll use guilt, obligation, and emotional manipulation to try to take what we've given you. Don't let them. You deserve this security, this freedom. Use it to build the life you want, not the life they've tried to force you into. Natalie's eyes glistened, tears appearing on cue, like they always did when she needed to shift the emotional landscape. How can you be so heartless? I visit their graves every week. I keep fresh flowers there. I'm the one who maintained a relationship with them. My voice remained steady, factual, piercing through her performance. You visited them twice a year. Christmas and Easter, like clockwork. I had dinner with them every Sunday for 6 years. I drove Grandma to her chemotherapy appointments when she got sick. I sat with Grandpa during his dialysis treatments. They knew exactly who showed up and who didn't. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. I'd rearranged my work schedule every week to ensure I could have Sunday dinner with them. I'd spent countless hours listening to their stories, learning their history, understanding who they'd been before age and illness had diminished their physical capabilities. Natalie had shown up for major holidays with her children in tow, stayed for a few hours, and considered her familial duty fulfilled. I have young children, Natalie protested, her defense automatic, worn smooth with repetition. It's not easy to pack up 2 kids and drive across town every week. You're single. You have all the time in the world. I have a demanding career in research biology. I work 60-hour weeks sometimes. The assumption that my time was somehow less valuable because I didn't have children was typical. But I made them a priority because I loved them and valued their company, not because I thought it would benefit me financially someday. My father's voice cut through the exchange, harsh and commanding. Enough of this. You're going to sign those transfer documents tonight, or there will be consequences. What consequences exactly? I leaned back in my chair, projecting a calm I didn't entirely feel. You'll cut me out of the family? Refuse to speak to me? Stop inviting me to holidays where you make me feel unwelcome anyway. The threat was empty, and we both knew it. They had no leverage over me anymore. No financial dependence they could exploit, no emotional vulnerability they could manipulate. The inheritance had freed me from the power dynamics that had defined our relationship my entire life. My mother tried a different approach, her voice taking on that wounded quality she used when she wanted to position herself as a victim. After everything we've sacrificed for you, the sleepless nights when you were a baby, the money we spent raising you, the time and energy we invested, this is how you repay us. You chose to have children. That was your decision, not mine. The bluntness felt good, necessary. Children don't owe their parents gratitude for meeting basic legal and moral obligations. You fed me, housed me, sent me to public school. Those are the minimum requirements, not extraordinary sacrifices deserving of endless compensation. Natalie gasped, theatrical and offended. How can you say that? Mom and Dad did so much more than the minimum. For you, maybe? The words hung between us. Years of observation crystallized into a single, sharp statement. You got piano lessons, dance classes, expensive summer camps. You got help with college applications, parental attendance at every school event, emotional support through every minor crisis. I got told to be more self-sufficient and stop asking for so much attention. My mother's face flushed with anger and something that might have been shame. You were always so independent, so capable. You didn't seem to need the same level of support. I learned to be independent because needing anything from you was painful. The confession came easier than expected, therapy finally paying dividends. Every time I asked for help, I got made to feel like I was being demanding or unreasonable. So, I stopped asking. But that doesn't mean I didn't need support. It just means I learned not to expect it from you. Trevor shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to be anywhere but in the middle of this family reckoning. Natalie gripped his arm, using him as both physical and emotional support. They'd always been a unified front, Team Natalie against the world. My father moved closer, his presence meant to intimidate. This victim mentality is exactly why your grandparents were wrong to trust you with their money. You're immature, ungrateful, and selfish. Interesting that you consider setting boundaries and refusing to be manipulated as character flaws. I stood to meet him eye to eye, refusing to let his physical proximity affect me. Grandma and Grandpa thought those same qualities showed strength and good judgment. The dining room suddenly felt too small, the air thick with decades of unresolved conflict. The Christmas decorations my mother had arranged so carefully seemed absurd now, festive cheer plastered over deep familial dysfunction. The nativity scene on the sideboard, the garland wrapped around the staircase, the stockings hung on the mantel, all of it performance rather than genuine celebration. Let me make something very clear, my father said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet he used when he wanted to seem threatening. If you walk out that door without signing those documents, you're no longer part of this family. No more holidays, no more family events. You'll be dead to us. The ultimatum was meant to terrify me into compliance. It might have worked when I was younger, when the thought of losing family connection felt unbearable. But I'd spent the last decade watching them demonstrate, over and over, that I'd never really had their full acceptance anyway. That's your choice to make, I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. But understand that you're the ones choosing money over relationship. I'm simply refusing to give you what isn't yours to claim. Natalie stood, moving to our father's side in a show of solidarity. You're really going to do this? Choose money over your own family. I'm choosing dignity over abuse. The reframing was important, a crucial clarification. I'm choosing to respect the wishes of two people who actually loved me unconditionally. I'm choosing to stop letting you make me feel guilty for having something you want. My mother's tears were flowing freely now, mascara tracking down her cheeks in dark rivulets. You're breaking my heart. My own daughter, so cold and calculating. Your heart is breaking because you can't manipulate me into giving you money that isn't mine to give. The observation was clinical, detached. If your heart was actually invested in having a relationship with me, you would have built that relationship over the past 30 years instead of waiting until there was financial incentive. The truth of it seemed to penetrate even my mother's defenses. She sank back into her chair, looking suddenly older, smaller. My father remained standing, rigid with fury and thwarted control. "You'll regret this," he said, the words coming out like a curse. "When you're alone with no family support, when you need help and have nobody to turn to, you'll understand what you've thrown away." This ultimatum, often seen in dysfunctional family systems, exemplifies a coercive tactic known as conditional love or emotional blackmail. The parents threaten to withdraw affection and belonging if their demands are not met, using guilt and fear to maintain control. This fundamentally undermines the child's autonomy and sense of self, creating a loyalty bind that is incredibly damaging. I've been alone without family support my entire life. The realization didn't hurt as much as it once would have. The only difference now is that I'm acknowledging it openly instead of pretending otherwise. Trevor finally found his voice again, attempting mediation. "Maybe we all need to take a step back, cool down, approach this more rationally tomorrow." There's nothing to approach tomorrow or any other day. I moved toward where I'd hung my coat, ready to leave this confrontation behind. The inheritance is legally mine. Grandma and Grandpa made their decision based on decades of observing our family dynamics. That decision is final. My father's hand shot out faster than I'd anticipated. His fingers closed around my wrist, the grip tight enough to hurt. His face had gone red, veins standing out on his forehead. "You will do as I say." The room went silent, except for the crackling fire. I could smell the cinnamon from the apple pie cooling in the kitchen, absurdly domestic against the sudden violence of the moment. My father had never been physically aggressive before, always prided himself on using verbal manipulation and emotional pressure to maintain control. "Let go of me." I kept my voice low and clear, making sure each word landed with precision. "Not until you agree to sign the transfer documents." His grip tightened, and I felt something sharp, probably his wedding ring, pressing into my skin. "Your sister needs that money. You're being selfish and ungrateful after everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" The question hung in the air, heavy with decades of unspoken resentment. "You mean paying for state college instead of the private university I got into? Skipping my graduate school ceremony because it conflicted with Natalie's baby shower? Forgetting my birthday 3 years running?" Natalie stood, her chair falling backward with a crash. "You're pathetic. Still keeping score like we're children. This is exactly why Grandma was wrong to leave you anything. You're bitter and small-minded. Grandma left me the inheritance because she knew exactly who you all are." The words felt like breaking through ice, cold and liberating. "She watched you treat me like an afterthought for 30 years. She saw Dad criticize every choice I made while praising Natalie for doing the bare minimum. She noticed Mom constantly comparing me unfavorably to my sister, always finding new ways to point out my deficiencies. My mother's face contorted, offense and rage mixing into something ugly. "How do you speak about us that way? We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. You owe us everything." "I owe you exactly what children owe their parents for meeting basic legal obligations." I pulled against my father's grip, but he held firm, which is nothing beyond basic civility and respect. "Both of which you've made clear you don't actually want from me." That's when I heard it. A voice from the kitchen doorway, calm and authoritative. "I believe the young lady asked you to release her arm, Norman." My father's head whipped around, his grip loosening in surprise. Standing in the entrance to the kitchen was Walter Ashford, my grandparents' estate attorney, holding a manila folder and looking remarkably composed. I'd given him the gate code and asked him to arrive at 7:30, knowing the confrontation would be in full swing by then. "What are you doing here?" My father's voice came out strangled, caught between outrage and confusion. "This is a private family dinner." Walter stepped fully into the dining room, his gray suit immaculate, despite the December cold outside. "Your daughter invited me. She suspected this conversation might occur and wanted legal representation present." He set the folder on the table with a deliberate thud. "She was absolutely correct to do so. I'd texted Walter yesterday after my mother's third phone call of the week, each one more aggressive than the last. He'd agreed immediately to attend, citing concerns about potential coercion or undue influence. I hadn't expected him to make such a dramatic entrance, but I appreciated the theatrical timing. My father released my wrist, stepping back like I'd burned him. A red mark showed where his fingers had been, the skin already beginning to darken. Walter pulled out his phone and photographed my arm from 3 different angles, the camera shutter clicking loudly in the silent room. Assault and battery. Walter's voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. Witnessed by multiple people in an attempt to coerce the signing of legal documents under duress. That's several crimes, Norman. Shall we discuss them? My mother found her voice first, shrill and defensive. This is ridiculous. He barely touched her. She's being dramatic, trying to make us look bad. I have photographic evidence of clear bruising and multiple witnesses. Walter gestured around the table. Would any of you like to provide statements claiming you didn't see Norman grab his daughter's arm forcefully? I'm happy to take those statements now and present them to the police alongside the physical evidence. Natalie's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence evaporating. Trevor, who'd remained silent throughout the entire confrontation, stood and moved away from the table, clearly wanting no part of whatever legal consequences were brewing. This is family business. My father's bluster had deflated, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. We can resolve this privately. Walter opened his folder, extracting several documents. Actually, this stopped being private family business the moment you attempted to coerce your daughter into signing away her legal inheritance through physical force. Your wife suggested 3 weeks ago, during a phone call, that perhaps the will could be contested on grounds of mental incompetence, despite medical records clearly showing both Lorraine and Harold were of sound mind when they revised their estate documents. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. How do you know about that phone call? Because your daughter has been documenting every interaction you've initiated since the will reading. Walter spread the papers across the table, revealing printed transcripts, phone records, voicemails, text messages, emails, all cataloged and time-stamped. You've made 47 separate attempts to contact her regarding the inheritance, escalating in aggression with each interaction. I'd started keeping records after the first month when it became clear my family had no intention of accepting my grandparents' decision. Every message saved, every call documented, every surprise visit noted with dates and times. What had started as self-protection had become evidence of harassment. Natalie sank into her chair, her perfect composure finally cracking. You've been recording us? Your own family? Protecting myself from you. The distinction felt important. You made it clear you intended to pressure me into giving up my inheritance. I decided to document exactly how far you were willing to go. Walter pulled out another set of papers, these ones official-looking with court seals. I've prepared restraining orders for all 3 of you. They're ready to file the moment my client feels unsafe or harassed. Additionally, we have documentation prepared to pursue charges for the assault that occurred tonight, should we choose to move forward. My father's face had gone from red to ashen, the reality of potential legal consequences finally penetrating his sense of entitlement. You can't be serious. We're her parents. Which makes the behavior more concerning, not less. Walter's expression remained neutral, professional. You've demonstrated a pattern of escalating harassment motivated by financial gain. Tonight's physical assault crosses a clear legal line. The silence stretched out, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. My grandmother had wound that clock every Sunday evening, a ritual she'd maintained for 40 years. I'd inherited it along with everything else. Another piece of their life that my family now resented me for possessing. Here's what's going to happen. I stood, my legs surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I'm leaving now. Walter will provide you with copies of all documentation we've compiled. You will not contact me again regarding the inheritance. You will not show up at my apartment. You will not call my workplace. You will not send flying monkeys in the form of relatives or family friends. My mother's tears were flowing freely now, but these seemed genuine rather than performative. How can you do this to us? We're your family. You stopped being my family the moment you decided money was more important than basic human decency. The words came easier than I'd expected, like a weight I'd been carrying had finally lifted. Grandma and Grandpa saw what you were. They tried to protect me from it, even after they were gone. Natalie made one last attempt, her voice small and pleading. What about Sierra and Hudson? They're your niece and nephew. You cut them off over money. I'm not cutting them off. You are. The distinction mattered, a final, undeniable truth. You're the one who decided to make this about inheritance instead of relationships. You're the one who chose to damage our family irreparably because you wanted money you have no legal right to claim. I walked toward the door, Walter following close behind. My father made a movement like he might try to block our path, but Walter's steady gaze and the phone still in his hand documenting everything stopped him cold. If we apologize, my mother started, but I cut her off. Apologies require genuine remorse and changed behavior. You're not sorry for how you've treated me. You're sorry you got caught and that there are consequences. I pulled on my coat, the heavy wool suddenly feeling protective rather than restrictive. Grandma knew this would happen. She wrote me a letter separate from the will, explaining her decision. She said that you'd try to take what she'd left me, that you'd use every manipulation tactic you'd employed my whole life. My father's voice cracked. What else did she say? She told me I deserved better than what you'd given me. She said she was proud of who I'd become despite your constant criticism and emotional neglect. She apologized for not intervening sooner, for not standing up to you more forcefully when I was younger. The letter had made me cry for 3 hours when I'd first read it, grief and validation mixing into something overwhelming. She wanted me to have resources to build a life free from your control and judgment. The front door opened easily under my hand, cold December air rushing in. My car sat in the driveway, just visible through the darkness. Freedom waited just beyond the threshold. Merry Christmas, I said, the words deliberately ironic. I hope it's everything you deserve. Walter and I walked to our respective cars in silence. He parked behind me, blocking any potential pursuit. Professional and thorough, just like my grandparents had been. Are you all right? He asked before getting into his vehicle. That was intense. I'm better than I've been in years. The truth of it surprised me. Despite the confrontation, despite the family rupture, despite the ugliness I just witnessed and participated in, I felt lighter. The obligation to maintain relationships with people who had never valued me had been severed, and the relief was intoxicating. I drove home through empty streets. Most families still gathered around dinner tables, sharing holiday traditions and seasonal goodwill. My apartment would be quiet, decorated with a small tree I bought myself and the ornaments my grandmother had left me from her personal collection. The inheritance had been substantial, larger than I initially realized. My grandparents had been careful savers and smart investors, building wealth quietly over decades. They'd left me not just money, but stocks, bonds, a vacation cabin in the mountains, and various other assets that would require months to fully sort through. But more valuable than any financial windfall was the validation of finally being chosen, being valued, being recognized for who I actually was, rather than who my parents wanted me to be. My grandparents had seen me clearly, had appreciated my choices and my character, had wanted to ensure I'd have security and independence. 3 days later, Walter called to inform me that my parents and sister had each signed agreements acknowledging they had no legal claim to the inheritance and promising to cease all contact regarding the estate. The restraining orders remained prepared but unfiled, held in reserve in case the agreements were violated. My wrist had bruised impressively, dark purple spreading across the pale skin. I photographed it daily, watching the colors change as it healed, physical evidence of the moment everything changed, when I finally stopped trying to earn love from people incapable of providing it. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. I made coffee in the French press my grandmother had taught me to use, the ritual familiar and comforting. The cabin in the mountains waited, renovated and winterized, ready for whenever I wanted to escape the city and remember the people who'd actually loved me unconditionally. My phone stayed silent. No calls from my parents wishing me happy holidays. No texts from Natalie with photos of the kids opening presents. The silence felt peaceful rather than lonely, space cleared for relationships built on mutual respect rather than familial obligation. I thought about calling my Aunt Louise, my father's sister, who'd always been kind to me despite family politics. She'd send a card with a note saying she understood my decision and supported whatever choice I made regarding my parents. Maybe I'd invite her to the cabin next month, start building connections with the family members who actually valued me. The inheritance would be invested wisely, used to build the life my grandparents had envisioned for me. Graduate courses and advanced research, perhaps eventually my own laboratory, travel to conferences and research sites around the world, a house with space for the library I'd always wanted, rooms filled with books and comfortable chairs and natural light. But mostly, the inheritance gave me something more precious than any material possession, the freedom to walk away from people who diminished me, secure in the knowledge that I'd been valued by two people whose opinion actually mattered. I raised my coffee cup to the framed photo of my grandparents on the mantel, their faces smiling in perpetual summer sunshine from some long-ago vacation. "Thank you," I whispered. "For seeing me, for protecting me, for loving me enough to make sure I'd be okay." The apartment stayed quiet, peaceful mine. Outside, the city moved through its holiday rhythms, families navigating their own complicated dynamics and inherited tensions. I settled into my favorite chair with a research paper I'd been meaning to read, content in the solitude I'd chosen rather than the isolation that had been imposed. My family had demanded I sign over my inheritance because they believed they deserved it more. They'd been wrong about that, just like they'd been wrong about so many other things over the years. My grandparents had known exactly what they were doing, and their final gift to me was the resources and validation to finally choose myself. The bruise on my wrist would fade eventually, becoming just another memory of the night I stopped letting other people define my worth. But the freedom that came with it would last forever, built on the foundation of love and recognition that my grandparents had provided even after death. And that was worth more than any inheritance could ever truly be. If you were in my position, armed with irrefutable proof of years of emotional neglect and conditional love from your immediate family, would you have chosen to walk away and honor the wishes of those who truly valued you? Or would you have capitulated to preserve a superficial family tie?